Hello, we welcome you to the program today. We will be studying Ecclesiastes chapter 8. If you will, please turn in your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and verse 1. The positive change of wisdom. Who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed. Solomon taught that the upright are few. We saw that in Ecclesiastes 7, 27 to 29. Now in Ecclesiastes 8 and 1, he continues by looking at the wise. As the truly upright are rare, so are the truly wise. There's something special about the man who is able to interpret or explain a matter to others. No one is quite like him. Wisdom can positively affect both the man who wisely interprets and those who wisely receive the interpretation or explanation of a thing. Think of how the face shines for those who teach in such a way as to help others understand, and how those who understand glow. Wisdom brightens their face. There is a joy in teaching. There's also a joy for those who understand. Wisdom can also soften the stern or the hard appearance of the face. Literally, a strong face. And so wisdom and understanding of wisdom can bring about this positive change to the person. In verses 2 through 9, we see the teaching of obeying authorities. He begins by saying, I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. And so, due to your oath to God, obey the king's commandments. In the New Testament, Paul taught that people ought to be subject to the governing authorities in Romans 13, 1 through 7. The authorities that exist, according to Paul, are appointed by God. In Romans 13 and 5, he said, therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Something similar seems to be here in Ecclesiastes 8 and 2, as in Romans 13 and 5. Keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Or as Paul said in Romans 13 and 5, not only because of wrath, but for conscience sake, and your conscience before God. Verse 3, do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever he pleases, whatever pleases him. And so Solomon says how that one ought not to be hasty to go out from the presence of the king. First, when you leave the king, he says, go with the honor of keeping the king's commandments. Second, do not do evil, for the king has the authority and the power to punish those who practice evil. Verse 4, where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say to him, what are you doing? And so there is power with the word or with the commandment of the king. His word is authoritative. His word is supreme. And so no one questions the power of the king, such as saying, what are you doing? Verse 5, he who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. And so he says, he who keeps the king's command will experience nothing harmful. He will experience no harm, particularly punishment from the king. So as long as you're doing what the king says, then you will not suffer for doing so. Other versions read, experience no troubles, or will know no evil thing or will come to no harm. Solomon said in this passage, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. We note from what he said earlier that he taught that there is a time for every purpose and for every work, and that God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. Ecclesiastes 3:1, and also Ecclesiastes 3:17. The wise man knows that if the king's command is wrong, he will be punished in God's time and by God's judgment. And so one might keep the word of the king for wrath's sake. What might the king do if I don't keep his word? What happens, though, if the king was wrong in what he commanded? The wise man knows, ultimately, that God will judge. And so he may follow the authority, as in this case, the king, and knowing that in the end, God will judge at his own time and place. Verse 6, because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of a man increases greatly. And so there is a time and there is a judgment for every matter. This is true even though the misery of man increases greatly. Even though the misery of man is great upon him, it's still true that there's a time and judgment for every matter. Solomon taught of the wickedness and iniquity of men, teaching that God will judge the wicked, back in Ecclesiastes 3:16 and 17. He forewarned people not to marvel at the matter of corruption of officials, for example, back in Ecclesiastes 5:8. Yes, there is corruption, but remember, God will judge. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 7. In chapter 8 and verse 7, Solomon wrote, "For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur?" And so man does not know what will happen or when it will occur in the future. And so there is that uncertainty. Verse 8, no one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit. No one has power in the day of death. There is no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. Solomon lists various limitations. First, there is no man, not even the king, who has power over the spirit so as to retain the spirit. Basically, man cannot prevent his death. He may delay it, but ultimately he cannot prevent it. At death, the spirit is said to go upwards, back in Ecclesiastes 3 and 21. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 12 and 7, the spirit will return to God who gave it. And so, as in the passage, no one, not even the king, has power over the spirit to retain the spirit. And so at death, the spirit returns to God who gave it, and no one can retain the spirit. No one can hold on to his spirit at that time of death. James in the New Testament said in James 2 and 26, the body without the spirit is dead. And so death being the separation of the spirit from the body. There is no retaining, there is no keeping, there is no holding on to the spirit so as to not see death. And no, not even the king, not even the highest authority or those in authority can do that. Granted, the king had power, but not even he had the power to retain the spirit. In this particular passage, the term spirit is from a term that's also, or can also be translated as wind. Now, in this particular instance, we see that in the context, it seems that the passage does refer to the Spirit. No one has the power to prevent one's death. No one has the power to retain the Spirit. However, some versions may read wind here in this passage, just as the term is translated wind in Ecclesiastes 1 and 6. So another version reads, no man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind. If that's correct, then Solomon gives the futility of trying to restrain the wind. And certainly that would be a futile pursuit, to try to hold on, to try to restrain the wind itself. That would be like grasping for the wind, as Solomon has already mentioned. Something futile, something without meaning. One could not do so. But basically here you have the point in the New King James that no one has the power of the Spirit to retain the Spirit, any more than someone has the power to restrain the wind by the wind itself. He goes on, and so we see a second of these examples. No one, not even the king, has power in the day of death. So what happens when a man does die? Even the king himself, even the one in the highest of authority. What can he do? Well, he goes on to say that there is no release from that war. There's no release from death. It's one appointment that all men must keep. Third, wickedness will not deliver those who are given to wickedness. To be given to wickedness is to be possessed by wickedness. Practicing wickedness or evil will not save you, will not deliver you. Ultimately, it will not benefit you. Verse 9, all this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. Solomon taught that there is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. The king can bring harm to himself by ruling in wickedness. Now, this may happen in this life, perhaps, if not a king, perhaps some other authority, some other ruler, perhaps rules in injustice or iniquity, or wickedness or evil, whatever it may be. If not in this world, he will be judged in the world to come. God will judge. And so we see this taught in the book of Ecclesiastes. Of course, if a ruler oppresses his own people, ultimately he's hurting himself by hurting his kingdom. Number 3, it's not well with the wicked. Verse 10, Solomon wrote, then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. We saw examples of vanity earlier. And now in verse 10, Solomon gives another. He says that he saw the wicked buried. In an earlier study, we noted how that burial was important. And for someone not to be buried was a sign of great dishonor. In this case, Solomon saw the wicked not left unburied, but he saw the wicked buried. This probably refers to those who were buried with honor. And so think about it. Solomon is giving the picture of someone who's buried, not just someone, but the wicked who is buried with honor. These people were those who during their lives had come and gone from the place of holiness. Think about a wicked person visiting a holy place, for instance. a place where those people who are devoted to holiness assemble. In reality, while they lived, they were wicked. However, according to the passage, during their life, they had come and gone from the place of holiness. So they assembled at a place where people of holiness assembled. But they were not holy. They were wicked. Well, what happened? Solomon said they were forgotten. Even in the same city where they had feigned holiness and righteousness, even in the same city where they assembled at the place of holiness, where other people of holiness assembled. Solomon said, this is vanity. Most manuscripts in this passage read forgotten. And so despite feigning holiness during their lives by coming and going from the place of holiness, these wicked people were forgotten by those of the city. And ultimately, they would be judged too by God. There are some manuscripts that read praised in this passage. Perhaps you have a note in your Bible. Even if the wicked were praised, who feigned holiness during their lives, they would still be judged by God. And so Solomon says this is vanity. Really, even these people, these wicked people who feigned holiness, whether they were remembered by those of the city after they died, they'd still be judged by God. And even if those same people of the city praised them after they had died, they'd still be judged by God for their wickedness. This is vanity. Verse 11, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. One point made from this passage is that the sentence against an evil work should be executed speedily or quickly, without delay. Failure to speedily execute sentence against those who practice evil only serves to encourage other men to do evil as well. Verse 12. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. In this world, there are examples of sinners who practice evil and yet live long lives. Despite these examples, Solomon was assured that it would be well with those who fear God. Generally, it is the case, as we've noted before, that those who practice righteousness and who fear God will have a longer life. It's not always the case. However, it's often true. Those who are living as they should are often blessed in doing so. Paul taught a similar lesson in the New Testament. To the contrary, the idea is that we reap what we sow. And so if we sow in wickedness, then we ought to expect to reap wickedness. In this passage here, though, he's basically pointing out that, yes, there are examples of those practicing evil who do have long lives. However, these are really exceptions to the rule. And even so, ultimately, those who fear God will be blessed. Even if they're not in this life, they certainly will in the life to come. We see this taught in other passages of the Bible. Verse 13, it says, but it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear God. So verse 13, while there are examples of those who do evil and live long lives in this world, ultimately it will not be well with the wicked, who live even perhaps the longest of lives here on earth, such being really as brief as the passing of a shadow. Let's say that someone lived 100 plus years, a wicked life in this world. That's a long life. In the scheme of things, it's but the passing of a shadow, very brief. It will not be well with them in the judgment, as they do not fear God. And so here's the point that he makes. Verses 14 to 17, we see a lesson of trusting God. Verse 14, he says, there is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of righteousness. I said, this also is vanity. And so the point here is that, yes, there are just men who get what the wicked deserve. And there are wicked men who get what the just or the righteous deserve. And so sometimes good things happen to the wicked, and sometimes bad things happen to the righteous. But as he pointed out earlier, that ultimately it would be well with those who fear God. Verse 15. So I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, and drink, and to be merry. For this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. Solomon saw that working for a living and enjoying eating and drinking the food and the drink for which he has labored was really a blessing from God. The man who fears God and he sees the fruit of his labor as being given by God. Of course, the sinner does not see that as such. He earned it himself. He owes it to no one else. He made it himself in life. But the man who fears God, who is good, who does good in this life, who works for a living and enjoys the things that he has as a blessing from God, sees them as being given by God. Passages like Ecclesiastes 5:18 to 20. The man who fears God, yes, he works for a living, and he's grateful to God for the things that he has earned, to be able to enjoy those things. And so Solomon saw this as a blessing from God, a gift from God. Ecclesiastes 2:24, as we have studied before, Solomon said, nothing is better for a man than he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Verse 16. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep, day or night. Earlier, Solomon wrote, I have applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 8 and 9. And again, Solomon returns to that great key question at the beginning of the book in Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 3. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? He often goes back to that question. Even if a man works all the time so that he sees no sleep day or night, what has he profited in the end? Apart from God, vanity of vanities. And so Solomon applied his heart to know these things, and he looked at the profit of man under the sun. What profit has a man from all his labor in this world? Even if he works day and night and never sees sleep, where is his profit apart from God? Verse 17, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a man wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it. Solomon learned in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Not even the wisest of men of his day, Solomon, king of Israel. As the work of God endures forever and is complete, with man being unable to fathom the work that God does from beginning to end. Given that, Solomon taught, man ought to fear God. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 14. We hope that this lesson has been helpful in your understanding of Ecclesiastes chapter 8. We invite you to return next time, and we thank you for being here today. Feel free to review the video anytime you'd like, and we hope to see you again very soon. Or encourage you to continue to study on your own. Thank you again for being here.